Right. Well, I'm going to drop the slides for today into the chat, and we're going to get started. I know several people are going to be accessing this asynchronously. So welcome, whether you're in person with us for this Zoom or whether you are joining later on during the recording. We're glad you're here. I'm Sherry Kendall from Multnomah ESD, and I'm the Early Learning, Early Literacy Specialist there. And I'm thrilled, beyond thrilled really, to have Dr. Rhonda Fritz with us from Eastern Oregon University. She's doing a tremendous job kind of doing some reform work in the science of reading at the higher ed level. So I'll let her introduce herself as well.
Thank you, Sherry. Yes, I've been in the last couple of years really transitioning EOU to making sure that we are aligned with the science of reading and making sure that our undergrad teacher prep students as well as in-service teachers are getting professional development that they need to make sure they're prepared to teach kids to read. So we're super excited to share with you some of the things that we have been learning and know are very important to you as administrators as you are looking to improve literacy instruction in your schools.
Yes, thank you, Rhonda. And she will be co-hosting with me any of the Science of Reading for Administrator events that MESD is hosting throughout the upcoming school year. So that's really exciting that we've been able to contract with her to bring this higher ed perspective to administrators as well. And welcome to those who are just joining. Our outcomes for today's webinar are that we develop an understanding around the urgency of the current literacy crisis in Oregon and kind of ground in our why during these first few slides. And then we're going to dig into learning the foundational knowledge and terminology used with the science of reading. We know several of you are rolling out new ELA curriculums. For some, the science of reading is very new in your buildings for teachers, and for some, they may already have some experience. But we want to make sure that as administrators, you have the opportunity to go into the school year understanding some of these big scientific understandings and models that will be talked about in your curriculums and among your teachers. So those models are the 4-part processor, understanding the reading brain, the simple view of reading, and Scarborough's rope. So we'll be digging into those and also just making sure that folks have an understanding of the definition of the science of reading. So Rhonda,
so first, oh yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
So first off, I have in front of you just a percentage, 35%, and I want you to think about what you think this might refer to in terms of reading. And we have a poll for you to give you some. So what do you think the 35% represents in relationship to our nation's 4th grade NAEP reading data? So pick one of those choices.
Really? Are you registered where you live?
Okay, we've got kind of a split here. Go ahead and end the poll so you can see.
You should be able to see the results on your screen now.
So 67% of you thought that was students achieving proficient or advanced in 4th grade. 22% said basic in reading, and 11% of you said below basic. So the majority wins here. So 35% of children in 4th grade in 2019 were at proficient or advanced. And this graphic that you see here shows where that looked like, what that looked like in 2019. And I think what's most maybe disturbing about that is the other side of it, that we had 65% of kids that were not that were basic or below basic, so definitely not proficient. And you'll notice as you go down through the years, even back to 1992, we haven't changed much. That trajectory of proficiency for 4th graders has stayed fairly close to the same. So that's a big piece of why Sherry and I are fired up about what we're doing, because we know that we've got to do better for our kids across the United States. So if Sure, you'll show the next slide. And if you think that maybe it's a little bit better in Oregon, you would be wrong. So less than half of Oregon third graders are being taught to read currently. And I think what is really astounding about that is as you go across this slide and look down here, only 8% of our English learners are being taught to read. And again, we're talking about 2019. So if you think about what has occurred since 2019, we can probably guess that these numbers are going to look much worse, which gives us even more reason to really be making sure that we are shoring up our teacher knowledge and administrator knowledge so we can do what's best for kids. And we need to think about it in terms of who it is also that is having the least success in our classrooms, and it's those English learners, students of color, and those who are economically disadvantaged. So there's just an urgency to what we're doing. There is a real urgency for the need for us to make a shift and make it quickly so that we can get better outcomes for kids.
Great. And before I move to the next slide, there is a great infographic here that you will have the link to in your slides that talks more in depth about Oregon and contains the slide that you could share with your staff if this is information that you would like to pass on to them as well.
So if we don't do something about this, here's some other sobering statistics that I wanted to talk about. If kids do not learn to read proficiently by third grade, 75% of them never will. So there's an urgency to just getting that K through 3 really beefed up and shored up right now. If there's a 54% decrease in the likelihood that kids will go to college if they are not proficient readers in third grade. And this is what the total outcome is, that currently we have 93 million adults in the US that are reading below basic levels, even though we know most jobs require that we have a proficient level of reading. So there's definitely, we know a lot of side effects to not being able to read proficiently when you're young. And this is just a drop in the hat when we think about things like social emotional learning and gosh, I'm losing my words right now. Just the impact of not reading well on the psyche of a child is also something that we want to really bring to mind and help you to see that there really is there's a lot of reasons why we need to be addressing this. And this is given all of those stats here. This is an infographic that talks about how kids learn to read and what methods are appropriate for the majority of kids. So if you look at this sort of light green area, that's 35% of kids in our classrooms, in our schools, will be able to learn to read no matter what we do, regardless of what method that we use. And we have those 5 to 10% of kids that I had a first grade teacher friend that always used to say, there's always those kids that I could literally lock into a closet with a stack of books and they would figure it out. But that's only 5 to 10%. And 35%, it doesn't really matter. As long as we do some sort of instruction, they'll probably learn to read. But that's only between 40 and 45% of kids. So we're reaching, if you think about it, that's how many kids that were back on that NAEP, around that percentage is who was proficient. So these are the kids for which it doesn't matter how we do it. But if we go down to this next little light orange area, 40 to 45% of kids really have to have a very structured literacy approach in order to learn to read. Now, that structured literacy approach is also helpful for these kids up here, especially when we start talking about the need for spelling and writing. Structured literacy can be super helpful, even for those kids who are precocious readers and for those who pick it up pretty quickly. And then we have a small percentage, 10 to 15%, who are going to need even more intensive instruction. So the fact is, we can make those statistics change if we're doing the right things. But if we continue to have a really haphazard approach to reading instruction, we're going to continue to get 35 to 45% of our kids reading at grade level. And this bigger chunk down here is going to continue to struggle. So what we're going to be talking about today in terms of the science of reading really is the structured literacy is the heart of that science of reading. So we know there is a way that we can change those statistics if we are doing the right things. So I think that's Sherry's going to talk about a little bit more about what that looks like.
Yeah, so the science of reading, we want to make sure that you are grounded in understanding what that term means in the definition. And so we're going to kind of talk about what it is and what it isn't. And in your resources today, and I'm creating an administrator Padlet, which I'll give access to, the Reading League, which is a literacy organization with lots of national recognition, has put together a PDF booklet for you on the science of reading definition, where the consensus of specialists in the area have come together and created this definition. So it's important to understand that the science of reading is a vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research about reading and the issues related to writing and language. So it's a consensus of over 50 years of scientific evidence. So it's not a curriculum, it's a body of knowledge. And like I said, it's over 5 decades worth of knowledge. It's not something that's new. It's not just in the United States. Internationally, it is recognized as how the brain learns to read best. And thousands of studies have been done in multiple languages. So it's not just how the science of reading for English, but it's how the brain learns to read really in any language. Because there are components that are the same. So when we think of our historically underserved students, and a lot of them speaking English as a second language, and they've been raised in this home where they have language that's not English, it's relevant to them too. So that's a really important thing to understand about the science of reading. It's not just for monolingual English students. It's been tested internationally and with multiple languages. There's tons of evidence about how reading and writing develop. And one of my favorite books, as far as translating what that looks like from all this body of knowledge into practice, this is one of the books I've found is the easiest. If you have not done a lot of reading on this, it's Reading for Life. And this is Lynn Stone, and she is out of Australia. And in this book, when we talk about the body of knowledge, there's a whole list of the greatest contributors in the field, and it describes briefly what specialty they're in and what they've contributed. So if you're a person who likes to really have the evidence, this book is great for translating that. And then it gives you the excellent resource for really understanding who the players are in those 5 decades of research and knowledge and what did they contribute. And the other thing about the science of reading is it poses, when we're doing scientific experiments or quasi-experimental experiences within the fields that are contributing to the science of reading, it's important to know that it answers questions. So why students struggle, it poses a question. It does an experiment with random students if it's an experimental, or quasi-experimental if they're slightly selected for certain markers. And then it's replicated over and over and over and over again. So it can be quantitative, and it can really provide the question and then evidence of the answer. So it's not qualitative it's quantitative and not qualitative. So that's an important distinction. But we're talking about real research that has questions, hypothesis, and answers, and there's been replication in order to enter the field in this big body we call the science of reading. And the most effective assessment and teaching methods to improve outcomes have come from those 5 decades of research and what we know about how the brain learns to read. So again, you'll have access to a PDF booklet that goes into the definition and can help with that. So I'm going to launch a poll here. And I want you to think about what fields have contributed to the science of reading. So you should have access to that. Right, I'm gonna share the results. So neuroscience, everyone is right because all these fields have contributed to the science of reading. And I think that's what's so wonderful about this is it's the consolidation of all these experts in neuroscience, school cognitive and developmental psychology, special and general education, the communication sciences and linguistics. Sorry, there's a typo there in that poll. Implementation science, all of those have contributed. And so it gives a lot of validity to it. The challenge is that translating all that science to classroom teachers has been very problematic because some of this research has been around for 50 years. It's not new research and it's been replicated over and over again. And the challenge is how do we get it to our teachers? So it's wonderful to have Rhonda on board with us, and she will throughout the year be sharing how Eastern Oregon is changing things at the undergraduate and graduate level for their teachers so that when you hire teachers from Eastern Oregon University, they will be equipped with this knowledge and we won't have to retrain them. I know a lot of districts are doing letters right now, which is wonderful. It builds up all that knowledge for teachers, but it's a lot of work and it's a lot of time and money for districts and states to invest in. So bringing this knowledge to you as administrators, making sure every child learns to read is a shared responsibility. So I am so grateful you are all here today as we launch into helping you understand what these theoretical models are within the science of reading. So thank you for being here. And I hope that by the end of today, you feel like you're a little bit more equipped to dialogue with your staff about this and really ensure that you have the administrative tools you need to help every child in your school read. So we just went through all those fields that are contributors. And it's also important to know what the science of reading is not. Like any term, it's gotten a lot of hype in the news lately. And I think that's excellent, but it's important to understand that the science of reading is not an ideology or a philosophy. It's not a fad or a trend. It's been around for 5 years, this body of knowledge, or sorry, 5 decades. This body of knowledge. So it's not a pendulum swing. It's trending right now. Social media plays a big role in that and getting the word out. But more importantly, it's not a one size fits all approach. There's components of it that we know work for everyone, but you have to have the knowledge base to be able to discern as a teacher how to scaffold for individual students within these components of the science of reading you'll learn about in the models today. It's not a set program of instruction. So if you have teachers doing letters training or other science of reading training this summer, they're building their knowledge base. Your curriculums are, if you're in Oregon, are built around the science of reading, your new ELA curriculums that you're rolling out. So that's going to be your tool to roll out this information and this way of teaching to your students. And it's not a single specific component of instruction. We have reading, speaking, writing, and oral language. There's several components to it to be a literate individual. So it's important to understand that it's very complex. It's not just phonics, because a lot of times you'll hear science of reading and people think, oh, that's just teaching phonics, but it's more complex than that. So we are going to launch into helping you understand how the brain learns to read. And I'm going to let Rhonda take over on this slide. And we were having some trouble with this video link today, but I'm hoping it will work when we go into it.
All right, so the first thing I want to talk about in terms of the reading brain is this 4-part processor. So just like Sherry was saying, where it's not really just about phonics, it is about multiple areas of the brain working together to bring about proficient reading. I want you to pay attention to the colors that you see here because there's color coding that goes on to some of the next slides that will help you to sort of put things together. But first of all, we have this at the back, we have this orthographic processor. So that part of your brain is where we are learning that how words connect to their visual forms. So that's that visual piece. Up here in the angular gyrus, we have the phonics area. So that's where you're associating sounds with symbols. Then of course we can't have reading if we don't have understanding. So that context and meaning processor in the blue is so important so that they're taking what they've seen and connecting it to those sounds and then also to meaning. But not to be overlooked at all is the orange, the phonological processor, and that really helps us understand how oral language is connected to what we are reading or speaking. So all of those components are critical, and the way we teach kids can help us to make sure we are making those connections for each of those areas of the brain. So if this YouTube video works, we'll watch that, but if not, we'll just talk through it. Did you share sound on your end when you shared screen? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if, let me go back. I don't know. You might just have to dialogue it. It doesn't seem to be working still. So I'll get you back to the beginning here.
Turn on the closed captions and we can read the closed captions.
Oh, that's
perfect.
Yeah, let me.
Thank you.
Oops. Oops. Oh, it says they're unavailable. So, all right. Well, Rhonda, you can narrate this and then you'll have access to the link in the slides that you can go back and review it. So here we go.
All right. Okay. So as I talked about, there's those 4 areas, but we aren't really born initially with having that circuitry to read. Reading is a cultural invention, and so it's not easy. Each of those areas that I talked about before have to somehow become connected, and they weren't biologically, they are not connected. So it is something that we really have to make sure that we are doing the right things to make sure that that is happening for kids. It's all those neural pathways that are critical to making sure that kids are able to read proficiently in the end. And we know now that structured literacy methods can help to build those neural pathways so that kids are ready and able to read proficiently at 3rd grade.
All right. And I apologize. I'm going to have to go back to my screen to get it back to go full. That's always a challenge when we downsize. Let's 1 second here. Let me get it back up.
So I think up next, Sherry's going to talk about how some of those reading theoretical models can help us to understand what is necessary for all of those neural pathways to come together.
Yes, thank you. Sorry about those technical difficulties. So if you haven't heard of the simple view of reading, this is something that your teachers will likely be hearing a lot about. And it's really not so simple, but it helps you to kind of simplify the big ideas in your head so that you can walk into a classroom and be kind of looking for these different components. So Goff and Tomner in 1986 put together this model. They were cognitive psychologists to explain everything we just learned about the brain. So what does it take to get to reading comprehension? So we know that it takes decoding. You have to be able to pull the print off the page. And the science of reading talks about how we need phonemic awareness and phonics to be able to do that. And you can see down the bottom left-hand corner here, there's a 4-part processor. This phonological processor has not been a part of the 3 cueing system or whole language, or even some balanced literacy programs. So when you walk into your classrooms and you're looking for the science of reading and wondering if it's actually happening, especially in K1, 2, or with struggling readers, your teacher should know something about phonological awareness. That's the part of the brain that helps us hear and manipulate sound. And that allows the working memory that students need to be able to attach it to print. So learning to read is speech to print. Like Rhonda said, learning to read is not natural. Learning to speak is. So when you think about how our students learn to read, we do a lot with language and sound and speaking before their brains are able to have the working memory to attach that to print. So to be able to decode, we have to be able to hear and manipulate sounds. And an example of what that might look like if you go into a kindergarten classroom, those students have to be able to hear and manipulate 3 sounds, like in the word cat, they have to be able to say k, a, t, change k to s. What's your new word? At, sat. And if they can have that working memory to segment and manipulate those 3 sounds, they can transfer that to print. And they should be able to write the word cat or sat. So that phonological processing piece is really important in order to get students to be able to pull things off to print. Kids who struggle often struggle with segmenting words with 4 sounds or 5 sounds, which are those kids in 1st or 2nd grade who are really still struggling to read. So decoding is being able to pull that print off the page. And everything we just learned about the brain is really important to be able to connect that sound to print. So when you're in classrooms, those are things you're going to be looking for on that decoding side of things. But we also know, and you may have seen this with some of like your English learners, I've seen kids who speak another language at home come in and they are excellent decoders. They can pull print off the page, and then you ask them to do a retell and they go blank. They don't know what any of those words mean. So equally important, the decoding side is a lot of phonics, but we also have this language comprehension component to reading. And language comprehension at the oral level. So if students are still struggling to pull that print off, they can still learn so much about vocabulary and word meaning and language structure and function of words and build up that language comprehension piece. So when you're looking, especially like at a whole group lesson, when you walk into a classroom, are they giving students lots of opportunities to dialogue and process the vocabulary they're learning, or the ideas, the big ideas from a story? And then when we have those 2 things working together, we can get to reading comprehension. So if you're looking at this multiplication problem below, the one that is most interesting to me is this last one. That if students are kind of good at decoding and kind of good at language comprehension, their reading comprehension is actually only 25%. So as we're coming into the school year and doing reading screeners, this is really important information for you as an administrator to know. This understanding of the simple view of reading. You don't have to know all the details, but you can know enough to ask some questions about what will instruction look like if they're having trouble pulling print off the page. What will instruction look like if maybe they can pull the print off the page, but they're not understanding anything that they need to understand in order to have reading comprehension. So understanding this formula and how it works is really important. The other big idea that comes with a simple view of reading is that English is morphophonemic. And that means that it's very complex. We pull from many different languages, and we know that there's some words that are very simple, but we also have to get to morphology to understand the meaning of words. So to know that by means 2 in bicycle is really important. So even though they might be able to pull off words from the page at the simple level like cat or a bigger word like mishap, they're going to quickly, when they get beyond those 2 syllables, have to get into morphology. So as you're looking to grades, 3rd and up especially, when you're walking into spelling time or reading of any kind, you're going to be aware, are we teaching a morphophonemic approach here where morphology is a part of that? And the best example I can think of for this is if a child asks a teacher, what does this word mean? Does the teacher have the tools they need to describe how it's segmented by syllables, to describe what a prefix or suffix on the word means, or a Latin or Greek word root? All these things that a student might not know about the word, and they might be very basic at the phonics level, or they might be more complex at the morphology level. So building up decoding and language comprehension is huge. It happens in small groups, it happens in whole group, it happens in phonics instruction, those foundational skills, but it also happens in that whole group reading time. So the simple view of reading is not so simple, but hopefully you can start to kind of compartmentalize these components of it as you go into your classrooms this fall.
And one thing I wanted to add to what Sherry said about the simple view of reading is that idea that oftentimes, especially 3rd grade and higher, the kinds of assessments we are giving kids in reading are usually focused on comprehension. And it used to be that we always thought if a child in 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade was low on comprehension, our go-to was to teach comprehension strategies. But if the kid is low in comprehension and we ask, if we read that out loud to them, would they understand it? And if the answer is yes, then we can probably guess that there's a decoding issue. There's something at that word level that is in need of instruction. So it gives teachers that ability to say, okay, it's a comprehension problem, but we're not just going to automatically default to comprehension strategy instruction. There may be something else that we need to be investigating to see what this child needs. Sorry, I have a little windstorm here. So what you're seeing in front of you now is called Scarborough's rope. And what Scarborough's rope really does, and it was actually, it was developed at about the same time as Goff and Tumner did this. So they developed independently, but what's interesting about it is Scarborough's rope really breaks down the components of the simple view of reading into smaller areas, which is also really helpful for assessment purposes, because even if we've decided, okay, this kid has an issue in language comprehension, we still need to dig deep to see what part of language comprehension is it that this child needs more support in order to become a proficient reader. So again, it has that word recognition piece. They called it decoding in the simple view of reading, but that includes, as Sherry said, phonological awareness, decoding. So that's really that phonics piece, and even the morphophonemic piece that she talked about. And then there's sight recognition in this as well. And that's another area that hopefully on a later session, we'll be able to dive into a little more deeply. But when we're talking about sight recognition, we're talking about any word, whether it is decodable or not, that the child can read automatically, which is our hope that they will be able to do that, because that automaticity is what brings us across on this rope, so that they're becoming more automatic as they're becoming more proficient. You'll notice up here we have increasingly strategic and increasingly automatic down here. So the idea is that all of these pieces have to be woven together and very tightly in order for us to get to skilled reading over here. And you'll see up here we're talking, that relates again to that 4-part processor model and that brain information. So language comprehension is really talking about the context processor and the meaning processor, where word recognition is phonological and orthographic. So all of those pieces are absolutely critical, so that when Sherry talked about the science of reading, and you might hear from people, oh, that's just phonics. It really isn't. It's really this whole Scarborough's rope, all of those pieces that are critical to make sure that kids are reading well by the time they are out of 3rd grade and beyond.
Great, thank you for that, Rhonda. And you will have links in a slide here at the end from Texas Reads. They have made these posters available for free, and you can print them out as a reference. If your teachers are doing letters, there's similar posters to that. These are really nice because if you look through them, they're color coded just so that you can really track where all these theoretical models cross over. And as we head into the school year and you're looking at your new ELA curriculums, or you're trying to support data study meetings or MTSS, having these color-coded posters is going to be really helpful for you, because you can kind of see how all the different components work together as you dialogue with your staff about them. So we are leaving some time here at the end for questions and feedback. I'm going to share several resources with you, which will take a few minutes here, but you can scan this QR code on your phone, or you can access the link in the slideshow by clicking on the green highlight here. So while you're taking a few minutes to do that, I'm going to go through some resources that you might find really helpful as we go into summer. So one recommendation I've had from folks is the science of reading is huge, especially if you're just starting your journey and learning about it. So we've put together a handful of kind of entry-level documents with varying levels of commitment. So I'm just going to go through and show you a few of these. The first one is simply a one-page chart, but it's really helpful in the sense that it's telling you the what, the why, and the how. And then it gives you all the researchers who've contributed to that. And that's what those little numbers are corresponding to up here. So this is a really quick one-stop shop. This is out of Arkansas. Several states are overhauling their curriculums and their professional development with the science of reading. So you'll see Arkansas, you'll see Texas, Colorado's up and coming. I'm working with ODE actively to work on Oregon's plan for really supporting the science of reading. So I imagine we'll start to see Oregon stamps on documents like this as well soon. But this really gives you all the definitions of key things that you would need to know in these pillars of literacy that make up the science of reading. So what it is, why it's important, and then comprehension. It's important to note that the phonological awareness and phonics side of science of reading is very explicit and systematic. Comprehension is much more complex and takes a lot of time to work through with students. It's not as sequential necessarily as phonemic awareness and phonics. So this chart can help with some of that. There's also a wonderful article that will take you 5 minutes or less to read, just on the simple view of reading, really kind of reiterating what we went through with that formula. Louisa Moats, who has authored Letters, which she began in 1999. So Letters, although it's making a big surge right now across the country, has been around for over 20 years, this body of consolidated knowledge in the form of letters. So she wrote in 1999, Teaching Reading is Rocket Science. It's a 36-page booklet. In 2020, she worked on a white paper to kind of give an update. And that's a really short excerpt that can help you kind of wrap your head if you have teachers or staff doing letters right now. These two components here will give you an understanding of what the letters content is, as she's one of the main authors. But it's also really important to recognize that from 1999 to 2020, when she put together these two resources, the knowledge has not really changed. So they say it takes about 20 years for scientific research to reach the actual practical field of education in teachers' classrooms. And this is a perfect example of that.
And I think that's a really important point in terms of you will have, especially veteran teachers, who will say, oh, this is just another pendulum swing. And I think what is different about now, so if you were part of the reading wars, you know that it got very ugly. But what's different now is that we really have all of those different sciences converging on the same conclusion. And that's what's changed, where before it really was about, well, this is what seems to be correct for my students. And now we know that there is a really strong body of evidence that tells us exactly what we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about literacy instruction.
Exactly. And this science of reading paper goes into that evidence. It's 16 pages, a little bit more reading. If you want to get into a more science-based journal, the science of reading and its educational implications is more cognitive neuroscience. It gets a little bit more scientific in its terminology, if that's kind of the vantage point that you want to learn from. And then this is the Reading League that pulled together all the experts in the field and had them get the defining guide and really settle on a definition for the science of reading as we talk about this consolidated body of knowledge. So it's 40 pages long, but it's, as you can see, the formatting's pretty large, so super easy to get through. You can print this out for your staff if you want them to. You could use it as a professional development. It's really great for bringing clarity, and we know that clarity is one of the things that gets a lot of high leverage work as we launch into new knowledge. So if you can read through that and really have a clear definition of the science of reading going into the school year, I think that would be really helpful for your staff. Again, thank you to Texas Reads and all their posters. If you click on this link, they have a very well vetted site with many, many resources, but these are the links directly to those 4 theoretical model posters if you have any desire to print those out. And then Oregon Kids Read, this is the infographic that you could share with your staff as we really ground in the why for Oregon. Is reading still a critical issue that we need to be focusing on? It includes that slide that Rhonda went over. And then we are going to share with you the Padlet that we've made for administrators in Oregon. And this is where we will be housing our recordings. We have another session talking about instructional look-fors in August for administrators who are using the science of reading in their buildings. And it also is filled with podcasts and books and resources. So throughout the year, we're going to have a community of practice for administrators that Rhonda and I will be hosting, with kind of a 10-minute quick PD and then some breakout time for you to dialogue with other administrators about how science of reading in your ELA curriculums are rolling out, and to really make a place to answer some of those questions and for administrators to share out their experiences. So we're hoping that'll be a great community of practice once a month throughout the year, but we'll store all those recordings of those little mini PDs in this Padlet as well. So I will drop into the chat the link for that. And you have it in the slides.
I really want to highlight this Science of Reading from Amplify podcast. If you commute at all or have time in the car, it's a fabulous way to get a really solid understanding of all of the different angles of the science of reading.
Yeah, and the podcasts are really great right now. And Read podcast is another excellent one. Glean Education Research and the Reading League also has a podcast. APM Reports, American Public Media, put together a series over, oh gosh, it's been a few years. But this is really interesting, these hard words and at a loss for words, because this was a reporter who didn't know anything about education or wasn't ever trained as a teacher, who kind of unveiled the challenges that our schools are facing and trying to figure out, why do we still have so many kids in the US not reading? And so they're fascinating and really kind of ground in what's not been working and why that needs to change, and kind of tips you into the science of reading. So if you've never listened to those are wonderful as well.
They
So-
were kind of the catalyst to a huge explosion of this science of reading. I really feel like Emily Hanford was really critical in getting this out to the general public.
Yeah, she is amazing. So these are all worth checking out. We'll be storing the recording from today over here on the left side, and we'll also add the slides. And then once we get those mini PDs from the community of practice, they'll be dropped in the second column. Some books to read. We didn't want to overwhelm you, but the Reading for Life is really a quick read that will just kind of sample into all those theoretical models and help you develop the vocabulary and language to dialogue with your staff about the science of reading. If you want to go a little bit deeper, many say start with chapter 11 of Language at the Speed of Sight. Some chapters are easier than others to read. This is written by Mark Seidenberg, who is much more in the scientific world than the ground level education world. So it reads more like a scientist, but he does make it relatable to educators. Reader Come Home. This is a fascinating book by Marianne Wolf. She does a lot with how the brain learns to read, and it discusses digital impacts on reading. So if that's of interest to you, it kind of takes how the brain learns to read and then really talks about the digital world that we're living in now. And I did a study with several folks from Oregon Department of Education and Oregon RTI and some local leaders this year on literacy foundations for English learners. And this is an excellent book in that it helps you understand how the science of reading isn't just for monolingual English learners, how it really is relevant to students who have another language that they speak as their home language. And it talks a lot about Spanish and English, but it also goes into Arabic and a few other languages as well, so that you can start to understand how it's relevant to all of our students, the science of reading. And then we have a section with short reads and resources. Some of the ones that we talked about in that slide are there. And then some websites. Again, there's so many you could go into, but the Reading Channel has an excellent YouTube channel. Locally, Oregon RTI, I know some of the districts have worked with Oregon RTI and some may be new to it, but they did an fabulous literacy symposium this year, and you can access all the recordings here. And they have many nationally and internationally known speakers who also have resources along with their webinars. So if you're in the mood for a few webinars, you'll definitely find something there that you can use. And then Patan Literacy Resources is out of Pennsylvania, and they also have lots of great webinars. And then Texas Read, where we got the free posters from for our slideshow today, they have several resources as well. So again, if you haven't had a chance to scan that code and give us some feedback, and I'll use it for attendance today as well for those who are accessing this synchronously. If you're accessing it asynchronously in the recording, please feel free to scan that link and give feedback whenever you do access this. So if you are not signed up for other events, we do have one coming up in August, and this one will focus on instructional look-fors to help you as you head into the year and tackle that beginning of the year screening and rolling out new ELA curriculums if that's relevant to you, and how you can support your teachers and what you need to be looking for. And then again, we have our community of practice that we'll have once a month throughout the year. So please register for those if you haven't. And then I put the link for MESD. We always have lots of professional learning events as well. So I'm going to stop sharing at this time, and we want to give you the opportunity to ask us any questions you may have around the science of reading, if you have any wonderings or questions we can answer. And yes, I will put the code, the scan code in. I'll put the link into the chat again. So Rhonda, if you wouldn't mind emceeing here for a second, that would be great.
Oh, of course. Yes, let us know what questions you have, anything that we can help with. And that feedback will be super important also as we start to plan those communities of practice throughout the year, so we know and can customize them for you as a group.
What I'm looking for my school is some type of a resource that allows us to implement the science of reading as we begin a brand new curriculum. We just adopted HMH into reading. And so as our teachers begin to use this new curriculum, how can they align the science of reading with it so it doesn't feel like an extra ask, but it feels like it's an integral part of that instruction? Because I know science to reading isn't something else to do. I know that it's integrated, but my teachers won't know that. They'll think it's just something else that I'm making them do. And that will just piss them off.
Yes, yes.
If I'm just calling a spade a spade. Instead,
Yes.
I want to give them the science of reading as the tool to help them best instruct children on reading.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty critical with any of those commercial curriculums. I think what's really critical is for them to understand what pieces to keep and what pieces to throw out, because as we all know, they're always so huge that you couldn't possibly teach everything that they have in those teachers' manuals. And so if them having an understanding of what those pieces are that should be kept and what those are that we should not waste time on will also help them to not feel quite so overwhelmed. So I think that's things like making sure they're using that phonological awareness piece, making sure they are using the decoding piece. And I think one piece of that might help you is that idea of explicit instruction. And that's probably a book we should have on that on our resource list too, is explicit instruction, because that's the way they deliver that curriculum. So that critical piece of how we deliver the curriculum is such an important part of that, because you can be very not explicit with those curriculums and end up with the same results we've had. So how do they learn how to be explicit in their teaching is one piece, I think. And then the other is how do we filter out what doesn't need to be there?
Thank you.
Yeah, and Kimberly, I just dropped in the chat, HMH has a crosswalk that they've made with the letters scope and sequence, which aligns with the science of reading when we think of especially that decoding side of what they'll be learning in letters or understanding of the science of reading. So I don't know if you've seen that or not, but I know we've had some districts who have found that helpful. And Caitlin, you joined late. I'll make sure I drop the slides into the chat one more time here too.
Well, thank you to all of you for taking time out of your summer day. Like Sherry said, it may not be summer for everyone, but we really appreciate your commitment to doing what's best for your kids.
Hey, and just